Great. We are so excited to welcome you today to the opening panel of the SID United States Career Fair. We have three incredible panelists here with us today, and on behalf of SID-US, I want to thank them and our sponsors, ACDI VOCA, MENA, and Tetra Tech for their support of today's event. We encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat, and please feel free to include your organization and where you're joining us from. My name is Tavos Daez, and I will be your moderator for this panel on the many paths of international development. I work with SID United States, and I am currently the Membership and External Affairs Manager, which means I work closely with our institutional and individual members, as well as lead all of our communications initiatives. Before I introduce our panel today, I'd like to share a little bit about SID-US for those of you who might be unfamiliar. If this is your first SID-US event, welcome. And if you've been to our events before, welcome back. We're so glad to have you. SID-US is the largest and most active chapter in the global network of the Society for International Development, which was founded over 60 years ago and has chapters around the world as well as members based globally. We are the only chapter in the United States, and at the core of it, we are a membership organization that brings together international development professionals from all stages in their career and from a wide variety of backgrounds to a neutral forum for information sharing and with the goal of promoting sustainable and equitable development. We are the global town square for international development. Now, a few housekeeping items to note during this panel. This session is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording and additional resources with attendees after the event. Auto transcription subtitles can be accessed and enabled through your individual Zoom settings. And if you have any questions for our speakers during the discussion, please place them in the chat and note if it's for a specific speaker. We will do our best to get to all of the questions during the Q&A portion. As I said earlier, we have an excellent group of speakers today with a wide range of experiences. And before I introduce them, I'd like to launch a poll for our audience to get a better idea of who's joining us today. You should now see a poll on your screens. And if you'd like to elaborate on the response you select, please feel free to do so in the chat. Joining us today, we have Alexis Bonnell, Busi Langa, and Clinton White. Alexis joins us with a rich background in innovative work within the development sector. She was the former Chief Innovation Officer at USAID, and during her time at the agency, she led transformation and knowledge management in the Management Bureau, served as the agency's first telework executive, and started the internal communications practice within the agency. Alexis is currently wrapping up 3 years with Google and is also on the SID-US Board of Directors. Busi Langa is a business development specialist with Catholic Relief Services with over 15 years of experience in the international development field. Her passion for development policy and practice have offered her opportunities to travel across the Global South, working for and with marginalized communities. And in her current role, she positions for and manages proposals for both grant and contract opportunities from donor agencies and foundations. Lastly, we have Clinton White. Clinton has more than 20 years of experience in the public sector and currently serves as a counselor for USAID. His career also includes working with national and municipal governments, as well as a range of private sector and civil society groups, including those representing women, youth, and marginalized communities. Clinton is also a member of the Senior Foreign Service. Alexis, Busi, and Clinton, welcome. I think we can go ahead and share our poll results now, just to get an idea of who's with us. Great, so it looks like we have a good mix of attendees with us here today. It seems most are on the side of an early to young professional career. So that is great to know, and I think that will really help us have a clearer sense of how Alexis, Busi, and Clinton, your experiences might be applicable to our attendees today. So I would love to get us started with a bit more about each of you, as I'm sure my brief summaries only scratch the surface of your careers. So I'd like to open our conversation with asking each of you if you would share what was your first job and what do you do now? I think let's go Alexis, Busi, and then Clinton.
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me. Good morning, everyone. My first job was I was a waitress. I loved it. I was great at it. I loved the interaction with people. I loved kind of constantly changing scenarios. Now I am the head of digital transformation for Google Public Sector, and I've loved that role very, very much. But I'm also going to be very transparent with you all in that I will only be doing that until March 31st because my entire team and others were caught up in the Google headcount reduction. So today, I am also thinking about what it is I want to do next. And I can talk, for those that are interested about what it is to have kind of a healthy outlook when you're going through these types of unexpected moments. But that's a little bit about me. Busi.
Good morning and good afternoon to those of you who are joining us internationally and perhaps in different time zones. My first job was working as an office assistant at a State Farm insurance agency in Indianapolis, Indiana. And the reason I got that position is it was in a strip mall. The office was in a strip mall, and my best friend worked at the dry cleaner right next door. And my boss would drop off her dry cleaning and she was like, do you have any friends in school who, want a part-time job? And so she asked me the next day, and then like 2 days later, I was filing paperwork and learning everything about insurance. So it was a job that I had for quite some time because she really liked me, to the point where she actually fired me because I didn't want to be the heir apparent to the agency. She wanted me to become an insurance saleswoman and take over her agency. And I was like, no, I'm going to grad school. So this is not my ministry. But yeah, that was my first job. And now I work for Catholic Relief Services in business development, which I believe is like, my true calling, working international development, definitely not insurance. I have been with CRS a little bit under 2 years now. Love the work, love the people, but I'm sure we'll get into more of those details a little later.
And hi, everybody. I'm Clinton White. And my first job actually was delivering newspapers when I was still, in middle and high school. And what was nice about that is it was a weekly paper, so I only had to deliver it once a week. But it allowed me the opportunity to meet neighbors and other people, in my neighborhood and throughout the area where I was living at that particular time in New Haven, Connecticut. But it was also a way of, meeting different people from different places, which was great. And now, I do the same thing in the work that I do at USAID. I get a chance to live abroad and meet people from all over the world. And having lived in places like Ghana, Senegal, and Pakistan and Egypt, it really is a way of, seeing the world, but also doing a lot of good work and helping people, supporting countries to alleviate poverty, as well as in areas of education and health. So really glad to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you all. It sounds like, each of you have had a career, or at least your first one was not the one that for you for the rest of, your life as it is. And it's really taken a turn to international development. So do you mind each sharing maybe a little bit about your journey through international development? What made you want to work in this sector? Let's go with Busi first.
Okay, well, as I just mentioned, I quickly realized I did not want to sell insurance. But my family is originally from South Africa. That's where I was born. And I know I don't sound like it because I moved to this country when I was really young, so my accent disappeared. But basically, as I'm sure many of you can relate to, being a first generation child of immigrants and an immigrant myself, my parents were basically like, you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a lawyer. And I was like, okay. So initially I thought I want to be a pediatrician because I really liked my pediatrician.
Mhm.
And then I figured out, okay, wait, I don't actually want to be a doctor. And I thought about being a lawyer, but then I was like, what kind of law do I want to practice? And I was still interested in the science. So my first degree from Purdue University, go Boilermakers, is in biology. So I thought, okay, well, I can be a patent attorney. And after I got done with my degree, I actually worked at a law firm. I'm based in Chicago currently. And I didn't like it. It was a very aggressive white shoe law firm where I just didn't feel like I was serving any purpose. My first case was working on Enron, those of you who are old enough to remember what Enron is. And so that was just definitely like held my feet to the fire immediately. And I'm actually grateful that that was my first case because I really got to see what litigation looks like, not just, what you see on ABC dramas every Thursday. And I quickly realized that this is not going to serve me. I'm not going to be happy. And I'd always had a latent interest in international affairs, international development, just because of my background and being somebody from another country and, having apartheid as this like looming historical part of my narrative. So I just decided, I'm going to embarrass my parents and not be a doctor or a lawyer and do something that they still don't quite understand what it is that I do, but I know is going to make me happy because I'm going to be able to contribute to, seeking justice and equality for Black and Brown people, people who look like me, people who didn't have the opportunity that I had to escape, a troubled environment. So that's how I ended up in development and into business development. That's just a happy accident. I found that particular niche. But that's how I ended up in international development and in business development. And I'm very happy at Catholic Relief Services. So I see one of my colleagues is in the audience. Hi, Celeste.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I really like what you were saying about, you always had that sort of latent interest in it, and maybe it wasn't so brought out until later in life, but you were able to kind of explore different avenues and figure that wasn't the path for you and landed in the right one. So that's wonderful. Alexis?
Sure. So I actually did not plan for a career in international development. That was not on my horizon, was not what I was looking to do. I was the third employee. This is going to tell you how old I am, folks. Way back in the 90s, I was the third employee of this thing called the Internet Trade Association. And my job was to go to places like American Express or American Airlines and be like, this thing, the internet, it's going to change how you do work, how you do business. And quite frankly, initially get laughed out of the room, right? I was told the internet was a fad, that, technology was, just kind of buttons and like had nothing to do with real business. But I highlight that because what I think I was really lucky in coming into my career at that moment is, of course, the internet turned out not to be a fad. But what was really important is that I entered my career with this understanding that every organization was going to have, and every person was going to have to adapt and change. And so without realizing it, I started really as a specialty in change management. And so, for those of you that are old enough, you can remember bricks to clicks, right, is how we talked about moving businesses online and things. But it also helped me realize that information access, technology was going to be critical. I then, in a very weird turn of events, did a few other things, but got headhunted into the United Nations, right, a couple of years after 9/11. And I actually had my first posting in Afghanistan in 2004. So it was a pretty intense time. And, to be honest, I don't think I've ever been practically qualified for any job I've ever had, but I have jumped in, had wonderful people who thought I could do it and figure it out, and I have. I think after that, I was very lucky because with the UN, I got to implement and deliver over $5 billion, I think, of USAID projects, and became great friends, and was mentored by a gentleman named Alonzo Fulham, who served as the interim administrator and who brought me over. He liked that I under-promised and over-delivered usually. And so he said, hey, you're American, come work at USAID. So I got to spend 10 years there, again, under incredible leaders who let me do interesting things, like contribute to creating the Global Innovation Lab or different practices. And the final thing I'll say is, ending my first run at USAID as the Chief Innovation Officer, that was an amazing job. That was like one of the best jobs in development, and I wasn't looking to leave. And I'll just let you know, when Google came to me, I was very specific about what I wanted to learn from Google. And I say that because I think being really specific about what you want to learn, how you want to grow when you think about a job is really awesome. So the first thing I wanted to learn was about technology, right? I wanted to peek behind the curtain and understand what was real, what was hype. I can tell you all about ChatGPT, don't worry, but also what needed to cost $200 million, what was free. And then when I was in meetings, questions like, what about privacy? What about security, right? Really hard questions. So I wanted to learn that. The second thing I wanted to learn was culture, right? Google had a reputation for creating really great culture. And I knew that in everything I tried to contribute at USAID, what I was really trying to do was contribute to changing behavior, right? Belief and culture as we kind of modernize the organization. And the final one, and one that I think is really been a very interesting journey, is actually customer centricity, right? Oftentimes in development, we are in love with our sector, but maybe not as much in love with our customer. And so I really wanted to look and understand what would it be like to approach something with such an intense user-centered, design or customer centricity. So that was a little bit of my arch, but I can look back at all of it, and every job I've had has ultimately been about helping people see their potential in change, right? In being able to evolve into where things might be going, and help them find kind of joy and, and capacity in that. So thank you.
Great. Well, I think first of all, especially for the many young professionals on this call, I think it's quite an honor to be in the presence of someone who is, championing the early days of the internet. I think for many of us, it might be hard to believe the world without it at this point. So that is really exciting. And I really love how you were saying your experience in that field really informed a lot of the work that you did later on and currently still do. So that's, just a great thread of like how you can bring those skills with you wherever you go. And Clinton, over to you.
Sure. I think my journey began when I was much younger, and probably be dating myself as well, but that's fine. But I know both of my parents were very much involved in the community when we were growing up. Leading on the NAACP, but also being very supportive and giving back to the community through public service. My father had been working. He's one of the few Blacks, at that particular time on Wall Street, but left that job to go back to New Haven to head up the housing authority, which really focused on all public housing in New Haven at that time. And my mother had went to nursing school, was, and became a nurse, but also left her job at one point and went to become a school nurse in the public schools there. But I can also remember, my mom really teaching me at a very early age about poverty. And I remember her, she had cooked, this meal and had made these Brussels sprouts. And I wasn't a big fan of Brussels sprouts. And so I was telling her I wasn't planning on eating them. And she basically told me, you will eat them. And then, it was at the time when Time and Life magazine would have these huge covers. And I remember she cut the cover of the, I think it was either Time or Life magazine, which on the cover was the famine that was taking place in Africa at that time. And she stuck that on our refrigerator door for my brother and I to say, anytime that, you think about wasting food, I want you to see these people who are starving and what they're going through. And that always sort of had a profound impact on me, and also made me think about how I can do more to help people. And so I remember, when Halloween would come around and, we would trick or treat for candy, but it was always great to be able to trick or treat with my yellow-orange UNICEF box where I was collecting money for people, who were, starving and needed support. And then the other story at a young age also touches on what one of the other speakers mentioned is, this was back during apartheid in South Africa. And so at a young age at my school in New Haven, they brought in 2 Black actors who were performing at the Yale Repertory. And the play was Sizwe Busi, and I know I may not be pronouncing that right, Busi is Dead, by South African Ato Fugard. And both the actors that came in was Winston Nashana and John Kani. And maybe some of you know John Kani from the Black Panther movie, the Marvel Black Panther movie. He was the father that had the patch over his eye. But I remember when he came to visit us at our school, he had the patch over his eye because he had lost it in South Africa due to police beatings in the 70s. And when they both came to our school and spoke to our class about apartheid, and it was very influential to hear directly from them, from people from South Africa, as a youth, and knowing those struggles that they were going through, and being exposed to human rights globally at a young age. Those are 2 things that really profoundly stuck in my mind of wanting to do something to help people around the world. And so when I had the opportunity to apply at USAID under this new program that they had for foreign service officers, I had a number of mentors who were helping me to better understand, what that work would look like, what to expect, hearing a lot of times from other people saying, that would be something very hard. You probably won't ever get into something like this. But I was very much determined. And fortunately, I was able to, when I had my interviews, did well on my interviews and was selected, to come in as a foreign service officer. And since that time, my 20 years, I've really embraced the work that we do and able to go out and as I said earlier, really provide, a service or a public service to what we're trying to accomplish, and helping people, get out of poverty, or helping somebody or community to change their life or their livelihoods, giving people more hope in life. But being able to see that, in somebody's eyes, directly of how you've changed it, and hearing from them directly saying, you saved my life, or, you changed me in a way that I'm doing better, and have a more positive outlook. And so, those are things to me that are very priceless, and that keeps me motivated in the kind of work that we do, and something that I'm, very much appreciate and know that, the vision of USAID and what we're doing is, the greater good of what we're hoping to achieve, for everybody in that, area of human dignity, as well as helping people to alleviate poverty and have a better life, path in life.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Clinton. It sounds like with all of your experiences, Busi, Clinton, Alexis, there's always been some sort of impetus, almost something that started it all, that led you to this sector. So whether that was your family history, or the values that your family held, or the values that you saw within your community, or just the skills that you had built over your career, the way that it's led you to international development has been so varied, and yet also still so relevant and so important to each of you. So with that, I would like to ask if you could share, now that you've been in the sector for a while, what do you appreciate most about a career in international development? And we can go back to Clinton if you're ready. Sure.
I think what I appreciate most about a career in international development is really, the mission of what we're hoping to achieve. As I mentioned earlier, going out and developing programs so that, people can actually go to school, or have a school built so that people have a place to go to school, helping young girls have access, to other careers or opportunities for education, working on areas around climate change and, climate smart technology of agriculture, to find better ways that people can, have, sustain themselves with food, and are, looking at how we respond to a disaster as we're watching today unfold in Turkey, and how USAID is right there on the front lines, providing support and helping people who, who are, somewhere deep down underneath, rocks and buildings, and pulling people out and saving their lives, or being there to help respond and to support them in what's taking place. And, and you feel really good about that kind of work, because you are helping people, you are providing, and, something of a greater good, but also, when you're able to help empower others, and for others to understand their worth, and that they are valued, and that they are seen, and that they are visible to all of us. I think it also helps them to realize that, they can do something, and they have the opportunities to go forward, because we're also supporting and we're working together to help each other.
Excellent. I like that point at the end that you were making about, the collaboration of it all. I think a lot of time, we might think of international development as the projects that are going on elsewhere, but it is so much of a concerted effort to do it all together. So that's great to hear that is something that you appreciate the most about the sector. Let's go to Alexis.
First of all, just a compliment to the people in the chat who are just raising such meaty, incredible issues. Like it's just neat to see the depth of not only the curiosity, but the provocation. And I think it's so critical for us. I mean, quite frankly, the best thing about international development is the people in international development. I mean, Clinton, I won't say like Clinton and I go back a ways, right? And it's just so funny to see us both kind of in this position, maybe to where we started, many, many years ago. But I don't think in any other industry are you going to get people who are so directed by purpose, right? And who really have prioritized and often gone through very hard things, divorces, family situations, et cetera, to kind of be, and risk and danger and lives lost, to do this work. And so I think that is an honor kind of in itself. I think that when I think about, kind of what that looks like, moving forward, I think it's also a really interesting time where it almost feels a little bit deja vu-ish for me of the 90s of like, you have kind of old generation, new generation, right? You have some classic cultures in international development, and you have some new kind of cultures and ideas. And so I think this is, if nothing else, a really exciting time. And if I could make a prediction, I think the industry has changed so much in the past 10 years, but I think the next 5 are going to be fundamentally game-changing, but also painful for us, and for many of us who've been established for a long time in this career. But long story short, it's about the people, and it's like no other industry on earth to be around such purpose-driven people.
Mm-hmm. Wow, well, thank you for that insight about, where we can expect to be in the next few years or so. I think conversations like that today are important, just so we all kind of know how to pivot and where to point ourselves. So it's great to hear that. But I also like what you were saying, and I think it reflects back on what you were sharing earlier about the people. It's the people we're working with, it's the people we're working for. It really makes a big difference, and it's great to hear that. Busi?
Hi, yes, I've actually been paying attention to the chat on the side. So I kind of lost the plot on what the specific question was. Could you repeat it again? I'm so sorry.
Of course, no worries. And thank you, Alexis and Busi. I can see you're adding your comments to the chat. And Clinton, so that's great. Well, to our audience, please continue adding your questions. We will try to get to any of those at the end of the moderated session as well. But Busi, back to you. The question was, what do you appreciate most about a career in the international development sector?
Okay. Well, initially I came in very like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. My master's degree is from GW, and I was like, of course, I'm not going to get a degree from the School of International Development or Conflict Resolution. I'm going to be policy, because I'm going to write the script, come here hard representing the global South, change all of the policies, because really it's a matter of like political will, and we just need to make a paradigm shift in how the West views the global South. And I'm going to be the linchpin that has been missing. So that's not true. So once I took that monkey off of my back and the responsibility that I was going to prove basically to my parents that the reason I didn't become a doctor or a lawyer is because I was going to free all marginalized, vulnerable populations from their status, I realized that, the joy that I find is in the incremental change. Somebody asked in the questions about, which sectors or which populations are underrepresented. And back to Alexis's point about the change that has happened in the last 10 years, donors such as USAID have really taken many steps forward in prioritizing local organization and marginalized communities, and starting all sorts of diversity initiatives and contracts and mechanisms specifically to address marginalized populations, people with disabilities, LGBTQIA+, not just going beyond, women and girls, which is typically where it goes, or, refugee populations, just trying to understand that there's a diversity in what it means to be part of a marginalized community. So being able to learn, first of all, about all of those different nuances and, what it looks like, and it's not a monolith, when you, back to what Clinton was saying, when you'd see those pictures of, people who were experiencing famine in Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Sudan, it just feels like it's all the same problem, but it's not. These people come from a rich, layered, textured history. And while on the surface, it may seem that, there's a coup, there's a civil war, here we go again. No, each problem is different. And so, being a student of history, I have really enjoyed understanding like the true impact of colonialism and what really happens like during a civil war and post-civil war, and what it really takes to build back a functioning state from fragility. So that has been really important to me, because it has humanized my work. It's not just this piece of paper. It's not flat to me when I read a proposal, even though, sometimes, as Clinton and probably Alexis knows, they give us these fictitious countries to respond to. There are real people behind there. And then when I have the opportunity to go into the field and, did a project, a STEM project in Egypt, going out to the high schools and the middle schools and, meeting the girls and, asking them, why do you want a career in STEM? And just seeing like, okay, this is why I do this, because this little girl from the governor, she's the first in her family potentially to finish high school. She's a girl, so it's a big deal that she's getting an education. She has dreams of going to university, and she really wants to do this. And I'm just like, that's gratifying to know that I'll play like a small part in opening that window and that door for her to be able to have access and be empowered. Because it's not charitable giving. It's just opening windows and doors for people who otherwise don't have them. So that is what is like nourishes me on a daily basis, is that I'm playing a small part in being able to create opportunities for people who look like me.
Wonderful. I think what you were saying about, finding that humanity in people and seeing and recognizing the humanity in everyone is really such a powerful way to inform the work that we do in international development. I think it also ties into what Alexis was saying about the purpose behind all of this. And I really like too that you brought up, looking at that incremental change. I think it's not something that on the day-to-day basis, it might necessarily be noticeable. But it sounds like when you're really passionate about that work and you're really investing your time in it, the incremental change at the end of the day is huge. So that is wonderful. So with all three of you, with your storied careers in international development, I'm sure there must have been some barriers along the way, some challenges that you faced. If you wouldn't mind, would you share a challenge that you faced in your career and maybe how you got over that, or any advice you might have for our participants? Alexis.
Sure. So I'm not going to say that I did not experience a lot of challenges being a young, female at that point, blonde, right? For most of the time that I was in the field, I was the UN's youngest country director in history in Jerusalem, which was a place of a long historical hierarchy and other types of things. So I'm not going to slough off that there weren't challenges with that, but to be very frank, the biggest challenge was me, right? It was me believing that I had the capacity and relevance. It was me getting over my own imposter syndrome. And I think, if I directed it outward, I think one of the things that unfortunately we do a lot is that we allow an organization or a role to dictate our identity, right? So as an example, when I came into USAID, I came in as the head of knowledge transformation and business transformation and knowledge management. But I came from actually, running major logistics on tsunami response, earthquake response, right? I mean, my entire skill set was in really difficult places doing really difficult things. And when the Haiti earthquake happened, I kind of put my hand up and said like, oh, I can be helpful. But people saw me as like, well, you're an M bureau and you're the telework lady. And so I think sometimes what we have to realize is that, as organizations, managers and leaders, but for ourselves, we don't always get to exercise our full experience and our full self. So a lot of what I found during my career was getting over that imposter syndrome, but also owning, hey, I have more, I can do more, right? And that was about being able to create relationships, to have a voice. And sometimes, an organization took advantage of it. Sometimes they didn't. But I will highlight for you that in my role with Google, this has actually been one of the most interesting conversations across government and across DoD, is a recognition by these organizations that they actually have very full and rich experience sets of people that they may be under optimizing or not knowing about. So I think it's something that you'll see a change around in the next 3 years, but quite frankly, those were, the two things that I felt as barriers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, imposter syndrome is so very real, and I'm glad that you brought it up. I think it's something that regardless of the career stage you're in, you might get an inkling of it in your day-to-day, and it's tough. And I really like that you brought up, maybe it's not so much about the external challenges that you're facing, but the way that you're standing in your own way. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I know, Busi, in our prep call, you mentioned imposter syndrome as well. So if you'd like to add to that or share your own obstacles that you faced and how you've overcome them.
Yeah, I was actually going to start off by answering my question to that extent. My imposter syndrome sort of stems from like visually, I just look so much younger than I actually am. And there's this thing in sort of the NGO world about, being like gray haired, being white haired. And my hair is obviously red right now, but I'm not gray haired and I look much younger than I actually am. So with all of my qualifications and my experience walking into rooms, either with a donor, with government officials, with partner organizations, even with staff within my own organizations, immediately everyone always assumed that I was like the assistant, the note taker. And I'm like, no, actually, I'm the manager. I'm the person that called this meeting. I'm actually in charge of everything for the next 2 months. So that fed into my imposter syndrome very early on, once I realized that, oh, I'm not necessarily the person that's going to walk in and be like flashy and bold and bossy. I lead, in a more quiet manner. I lead up and down and across the spectrum. I try to be inclusive. But everyone always thinks I'm so young. So it takes a while before people take me seriously. So that has been a challenge, but I've learned to since navigate it and just sort of laugh when people realize who I really am in the room and my level of experience and what it is that I am there to contribute. But then just also just feeling like I'm not doing enough, like I'm just not progressing as fast as I need to. So I guess it's me, I'm the problem, like Alexis was saying. Once you get into the development space and you just see there's so much to be done, it can be overwhelming and almost sort of paralyzing. Mm-hmm. How much change needs to happen, and you feel like you bear the brunt of it. So being deeply invested, both professionally and personally, in what I do for a living has created its challenge, because I don't know necessarily when to take work home. And then when you put on the imposter syndrome, it's like, no, I still have to prove myself. So yes, you should be working this hard, but it's not realistic. It's not manageable. So there's just a little bit of that give and take about understanding what it is that you actually do, the importance that it does serve, but at the same time, you are not an ER doctor. So you do need to give yourself some grace in terms of the work that we're doing. So imposter syndrome is a huge challenge, especially when you don't present as the stereotypical senior level professional.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think what you were saying as well about, comparing yourself and looking at where others are at versus where you are really can fuel those like further feelings of imposter syndrome, that you're not meant to be there, that you shouldn't be there. And so I appreciate what you were saying about, finding the grace to allow yourself to just be, and to be flexible, and to recognize that your path is not like anyone else's, which is what we're trying to show our attendees with this call today. And I also like that you found a little bit of humor in the fact that maybe people always assume you're younger than you are, and having a bit of joy in those things too. Clinton, over to you.
Yeah, no, and I really do appreciate this question, because I think, in my career also, there aren't very many people of color, Black or brown people in the Foreign Service, and, working and doing this work overseas. And, you face a lot of systemic racism and things of that nature here, but also an overseas environment. A lot of times, you may be the first person of color from the US that they see or meet in meetings, or are engaging, in the work that we do. And what I would come across a number of times, similar to my fellow colleagues here, is, I would sit in a room and, people would think, because somebody else was there that wasn't Black or brown, that they were the principal, or they were the ones leading the meeting. And you would have to, redirect the attention in a way of, no, as you were saying earlier, was, this is the meeting I had called. This is the meeting that I'm having with you all. And I can remember that, meetings with the government where, you feel like they weren't listening, or other governments where they weren't listening, or weren't focused on you, but you were the one that actually had the knowledge, and you're the one that actually did provide it. And a lot of times, that could really, make you feel invisible, or make you feel devalued. And I think for me, it was more or less overcoming that by, speaking up, using my voice, but letting people know in a way, that I'm helping to move this along. I'm just as equal a part of this as anybody else. And that, my opinion and what I'm saying does count. And, you have to build those, relationships and let people know that. And it's happened, in a number of places, but always I feel to overcome it is to make sure that people do recognize that and make sure that people do respect you, and make sure that, that you let people know, in a diplomatic way, if you're feeling that of, let me change, the table on this and let people understand where I'm coming from. And, and I feel I've been very successful in doing that, and overcoming it. And I feel, that it's, for me and where I am, for others that are coming up in the Foreign Service, that, I have I have an obligation to also help and make the situation easier and better for them as well. And that's something I'm very much dedicated in doing, that I have been doing. I've had a number of mentors, but also mentoring others and coaching people, so that they also don't feel this way, or they also know how to, respond to this situation. I mean, you'd even, see things where, you would read about a country in particular where you might want to go, and, in the write-up, they would say that if you were Black or, a brown skin, or darker skin, you will face racism and things of that nature. And so, it's how you think through that, and what's, what is it that you're willing to take on, especially when you're bringing your family, and how you want to deal with those things and where you want to go in your career, but also, making sure that when you do have these opportunities to face them, that you do challenge them and help other people to realize that the way they're looking or thinking is not the way that we should be. And if you can help to overcome that, then you'll make that successful for the next person coming through, or next time you have that meeting, they will understand. And I would see that happening. So I think it's really important to speak up and also know who you are, and know your own value, and not let anybody take that away from you.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I think that for some of our attendees, there really might be moments where they might be the only woman, the only person of color, the only non-gender conforming person in the room. And those situations can be uncomfortable, and they can be awkward, and knowing how to take up space and to, as I like what you said, diplomatically, make your point and show that you are worthy of respect can be a skill that might need to be practiced, might need to be honed a bit, but it's definitely worth it, I think. And it sounds like what you were saying with making that space for others as well, and providing, the improvements to make everything or the situation more welcoming and more inclusive. Thank you for sharing that. So it looks like we have about, I want to say 20 minutes left. So I think we can go over to our Q&A session. I will call on Julie if you'd like to read out any questions that we received from the audience, and we'll hand it off to our speakers.
Yeah, wow, we've received a lot of questions, a lot of great questions. Thank you to the participants for really engaging via the chat. Okay, some of these questions have been answered through the chat, but I think for some I'm going to repeat the question just in case others want to answer as well and provide some advice. So the first one was to Busi from Mariel. She did answer in the chat, but here's the question in case Alexis or Clinton has anything. Any advice for someone trying to get into the refugee immigrant relief services field? I'm wondering about any skills we can work on to help us get in that field. So Alexis, Clinton, if you have anything to add, that's okay. That would be great. If not, no worries. We have plenty of other questions.
Sure. I mean, I would just add really briefly that if you want to get into that, you've got to be willing to go and sleep, potentially in a camp in Syria, right? And I say that because I've mentored a lot of people who had aspirations for particular things, but weren't willing, just like, they're like, I want to work on that, but in Rome, or I want to work on that, but out of Nairobi, right? And so I think my biggest, thing is that it's not easy to find people who are willing to go and be in hard places, right? And do hard things when you talk about physical presence. And there were a number of times in my career where I hired in Afghanistan, I had college interns who, and this is in 2004, right? During the middle of war, who flew into Afghanistan, knocked on my compound door, and said, I'm here. And I was like, you're crazy and you're hired, right? Because anyone willing to just, and I'm not saying you should go in war zones and do that, but, I think my advice is that, many of the skill sets, organization, project management, logistics, storytelling, any of those things are just as viable in that sector. But I would ask someone to reflect, are you, the best thing you can do is just be willing to go to the hardest place, the place that is the least comfortable, because quite frankly, it's hard to get people there. So that's my gut reaction. I don't know, Clinton might have some better advice.
No, I mean, I would also say, I mean, you really have to understand the environment that you're going to be in and the environment that you're going to be working in, and when you understand that, it will help you to be better prepared for that. For example, when I was in Pakistan, people would, there's a lot of work that we're doing, things on the humanitarian side, but you also have to prepare yourself for that environment. It's very dangerous. There are things that are taking place where you have to, protect, ensure that your life is, not in danger and things of that nature. And so you always have to remember, what are some of the cons about these things, and preparing yourself for that kind of environment. And then, think about the pros of, how you be life-saving and helping people and doing the kind of work that makes you intrinsically, value or happy about it. Because, it is a commitment, and you have to be committed to this kind of work for you to be successful. But also, again, preparing yourself and understanding what you're getting into, I think ahead of time will help you. But then once you're also there, how do you, relate with the other people that you're working with, learning from them, learning from others who've maybe experienced it before. And that, I think, is a good way of helping you to think about, that kind of work. Because you can see some things or hear things that really do, can impact you. And I'll give you an example. Working on Libya, there was a lot of issues around trafficking in persons, or, people from sub-Saharan Africa trying to get to Europe. And, I can remember, getting a phone call from a person at one of these detention camps where, they were basically saying, that their life was in danger, and, they really weren't supposed to have this phone, and they were taking a risk. But, somebody had given them my number to say, what was going on there, people being raped, people being beaten, and things of that nature. And, taking that information back to, the UN and others at USAID to see, what we could try to do to help these people. But it's, you have to really, process and take those things and know what really is happening on the ground sometimes, and being able to try to respond to that with all your emotions that you're feeling about what's happening to somebody or people around them.
Well, thank you. Okay, so the next question that we have is from Zainab. She's a graduate student, international education, which is very competitive. It's already challenging to get work as an immigrant since English is my fourth language. As the majority of jobs advertised, you're expected to have superior written and spoken English skills. Do you have any kind of advice for her? I mean, language is important, but any advice? She's got 4 languages.
I mean, I think it's my 2 cents is I think it's hard and it can be unfortunate, but it's also just something that to be straightforward, I don't think will go away, right? And so for me, one of the ways that when I spent 4 years in Jerusalem, I literally taught myself, at least enough functional Arabic to be pleasant and to be, productive. I literally use Google Translate. I had one of my practices was every night I would do 10 things that I expected to come up in my work, and I would translate those. And then the next day I would practice with my staff, right? And sometimes it was right, sometimes it was wrong, but it's hard. For me, I just kind of dug in and learned what I could learn. I wish it was different. I think the technology is amazing now. So there are definitely great tools that you can use and should use as well. And if you email me, I'm happy to send you some.
All right, thanks, Alexis. Busi or Clinton, anything else to add? Okay, so I'm going to go to the next question. This is from Josh. Any tips for someone mid-career looking to make the shift to international development? We get this question a lot, or I get this question a lot. So we've had panel discussions on this question, Josh. So you should check out our recordings in our YouTube channel, because we have a few some panel discussions on transitions. So any advice, Alexis, Clinton, or Busi?
So really quickly, I would just say, I just put a note in the chat around around how to get field experience. I would say, especially from people who've come from regular business backgrounds or other types of things, starting with social entrepreneurs as the way you get into international development is actually usually there's much more transparent value exchange. Like those social entrepreneurs value kind of a lot of times the business or the mid-level expertise that you might have. And they're much more ready to apply it. And oftentimes, quite frankly, you get much more engaged with customers and the field work than you necessarily would in international development has an expert bias, right? It's true of any industry, but it's one of the ones that we have as well. So I would actually say, look for the organizations that actually value and are trying to cross the bridge, right? And oftentimes social entrepreneurs are also can be younger, right? And so looking for someone with a little bit more experience, a little bit of like a grounding force is actually something that they're seeking. So it's a different approach, but actually I think one that's going to grow as far as the practice of where international development goes, and is really looking for that type of talent.
Thanks, Alexis. Busi?
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on her point. Back to the previous point that I was making about the traditional donors starting to understand the complexity in marginalized and vulnerable populations. Another thing that they're emphasizing in the field right now is innovation. We've been doing development for 60, 70 years. I think USAID is 70 years old? Clinton?
61.
61, okay. So it's a middle-aged man or woman, but they're looking to bring in fresh blood. They're trying to understand, okay, we've been doing things a certain way for the last 6 decades. We've reaped some benefits, but if you're familiar with the SDGs, they were supposed to be achieved as millennial development goals. Here we are 23 years later, and we're on the 3rd tranche of them. We're looking at 2030. So, to Alexis's point about looking for younger organizations, I would say, foundations, newer upstarts that are, 20 years old or younger, they're really looking to bring innovation to the table, how to work smarter, not harder, how to start with small pilot programs and scale them up. And that requires a different kind of vision than what has necessarily been taught to people who graduated 10, 15, 20 years ago, or did Peace Corps, in the 90s in Bosnia, in Yugoslavia. So definitely being able to bridge those soft skills. You may not have like the credentials on paper, but bringing over those soft skills of being able to be, organized, being able to multitask, being able to adapt to different cultures, being comfortable in situations where you're the only person that doesn't speak the language in the room, but can still function and, appreciate the culture and get what you need to get done for that project, for that deliverable. Those are all skills that are massively transferable, and they can't be taught, they can't be bought. So if you can rewrite your CV to flesh out those soft skills that are applicable to a fast-paced, ever-changing, politically dynamic environment, you're good money. I mean, that should at least provide you an initial screening if you can communicate that in positions that you're looking for, that you have a true passion for this, you're looking to make a change, these are the skills that you think are applicable, this is the lens that you'd be bringing things to the team and bringing that fresh perspective. I mean, me personally, I'm always looking for that because I read the same things over and over again. And I'm just like, no, this isn't going to work. We already tried this with this project. I have the end evaluation. Like, I know what worked and what didn't work. We got to try something new. So.
Great advice, Busi. Clinton.
Yes, no, I was going to say that, I think people should always, look to see what it is that you're interested in. I mean, at USAID, we do take a lot of people that are mid-career and come to work with us, both as foreign service, civil service, or as contractors. And so there's lots of opportunities to be able to work at USAID to get those, opportunities or skills that you'd like to, move into. And what I would say is, look to see, at USA jobs or USAID, look to see what jobs and things are out there. Because, sometimes people feel like you have to have all of this, international and living overseas experience, which, yes, that actually is really helpful. But as you can see in the different skills that are needed at USAID, I mean, from lawyers to financial managers, to education officers, to people that understand agriculture or climate, climate change. I mean, there's a whole array of skill sets that are needed in this agency. Those are administration type skill sets. So it is, finding, what it is that you're interested in doing and seeing how you can match your skill sets up to opportunities here at USAID, and, doing some networking and engagements or events that we might be hosting, and, realizing that, it's a good, that you can make that transition. I've seen a number of people transition and, and sometimes they'll come in as a contractor and then they'll convert over to civil service or foreign service. And then, we have those ways and those opportunities for people, to be able to, do more or live overseas, and other things. So I would just say, whatever that you're interested in and passionate in, look at USAID and the kind of skills that you bring, and then see what you might be able to match up to, and apply and as I said, start networking and build that, and feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in contact with people in the areas that you're interested in.
Great advice, Clinton. I always think of, for some of you know this, but my sister is, she's an engineer, and she actually also did this mid-transition. She was a civil engineer, worked in the private sector, and has always wanted to do international development as well. And mid-career, she did the change. She joined the Peace Corps mid-career, which is unusual, but she did it. And then she volunteered with Engineers Without Borders while she was in the Peace Corps. And then a position opened up at Engineers Without Borders when she was done. And they said, hey, why don't you come work with us? So she ended up, interviewing and now she's there. She's had a program. So it is possible. It's possible. Okay, so the next question is from Alice. It's for all of you. What do you wish you had known or done differently when you first started out in your career? Anyone willing to share that?
Sure. What do I wish I would have known differently? I think number one, do not assume your manager knows what you want or what you need, and same way that you shouldn't do with your spouse or partner, right? Sometimes I'll hear younger kind of brides say, well, my husband should just know. Well, that's not how it works, right? And so, as an example, I've been counseling a lot of different folks lately, and one of the things that I hear a lot is someone who fears, for example, that they may not be getting an opportunity because of their sex or race or other types of things. And when I get in deep with them in the conversation. And I said, okay, well, what makes you think that? And they said, well, maybe I'm female and this other counterpart of mine, other team member who's male, is getting to do all of these things that I want to do. And when I sit with them and I say, well, how did that conversation with your manager go when you kind of highlighted what it was, how you wanted to grow, what you wanted to learn, what types of experience or things that you wanted to be able to practice? And when you asked for those things, what was the response? And quite frankly, 9 times out of 10, that conversation hadn't actually happened. They assumed their manager should just know and should see from their work and should be kind of proactively rewarding them. And I would just remind us that managers are people too, right? They got a lot going on. We have our own drama and lives, and we're trying to answer the mail and get things out. So this is what I wish I would have known when I was younger, is that, again, if I'm working hard, if I'm earning it, if I'm under promising and over delivering, it's really important for me to have a quality relationship with the manager, people who influence my career, and to share with them and be vulnerable about what my dreams and hopes are, and actually ask them to be proactive in helping me figure out how to get there. Right? And the actual tactics, the actual experience. And I found that that's really important. I wish I had done that better, but long story short, I actually see that there's a lack of that conversation happening now that kind of surprises me. And I would really encourage you all, to not assume your manager knows or understands what the right thing is, and kind of use that counsel and be vulnerable to really kind of lay out a map like that.
I completely agree on that, Alexis. I also do think that I have found that if you could have if your manager can't be your advocate, find an advocate within your organization to help you, kind of move up, or if you have challenges in your career. I know we're at time, so I do have to turn it back to Pebbles. But Busi, Clinton, any final advice before I turn it over to Pebbles?
I would just encourage everyone to, if you have an interest in development, stay the course. It's so cliche, but it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Don't be afraid. Just quickly piggybacking on what Alexis said, asking your manager exactly for what you want. Like, everyone hates doing performance reviews, but that's really the time when you need to get into brass tacks about if I meet all these deliverables this year, what's going to happen to me next year? Will I take on more? Will I take on less? Will I be given more opportunities? Just don't be afraid of that. And then secondly to that, don't feel like you owe your organization loyalty if you are unhappy and you are not getting your professional needs met. Do not be afraid to let them know that, okay, because I've done this before. I was like, what do I need to do to get promoted? And they would just say, well, you've gotten excellent reviews, but you just need to be here longer. And I was like, I need to be here 5 years. I'm on year 2. I'm not going to sit around for 3 years. So don't be afraid to be aggressive in that sense of okay, I've put in 2 to 3 years here. I'm not happy. I don't see a vision forward. I've tried to advocate for myself. It's time to move on. Just don't be afraid of that.
Yeah, and my advice to you is, don't limit yourself. I feel that a lot of times people will put a limit on themselves or feel like this is all that they've been able to achieve, but realize that there's much more to you, and much more in you, and others that are willing to help you if that's what you want to achieve. And, I just feel like sometimes, we sort of put this limit and think that's it, but no, there's so much more. And that's what I've learned, about myself is, sort of understanding that you can get and aspire to where is it you want to go, or you can aspire to get to this next level. And it's just a matter of thinking, what is it that it's going to take? But also, don't be afraid to reach out and ask people for help or ask people for advice, or ask, to be mentored. Even where I am now, I mean, I don't have any airs or anything about myself. I'm very humble, and I reach out to anybody. And Alexis knows this very well because we work together on a number of things. But you learn so much from anybody and wherever they are. And as long as we treat each other as equals in that sense and respect each other, I don't think there's anything that people aren't able to do or strive to do, you know, when we approach it that way. So that would just be my advice.
Excellent. I completely agree. When I was in a transition, I actually reached out to Alexis. I don't know if you remember that, Alexis, but I did. All right. Okay. I'm going to turn it back over to Pebbles. Pebbles, thank you. And thank you to the panelists.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for selecting some of the questions. I know there were so many great ones in the chat, and I wish we had more time to go through them, but I believe our speakers very generously shared their contact information in the chat. So if there are any other questions, please feel free to reach out to them or us. And thank you so much, Alexis, Busi, and Clinton. This was really a fantastic discussion, and I definitely feel that I've learned so much from your nuggets of wisdom. I feel like I'm going to have to take a step back later and write down all of these really helpful notes. And to all of you joining us on the call, thank you for being here, and we hope you'll stick with us throughout the day. The virtual exhibit hall in Brazen will open at 11:30 a.m. Eastern for all of you to meet with recruiters and representatives. And when the exhibit hall closes, we'll have our closing panel at 3:30 p.m. featuring 4 different presenters, each giving a 15-minute career flash talk. So we hope to see you later, because at the end of the day, we'll also have our networking happy hour. We come together with board members, staff, co-chairs, representatives, and other attendees. We'll play some bingo, and the winner will receive a ticket to our 2023 annual conference on May 24th. So I hope to see you all there later today. And lastly, please take our survey at the end of the day to let us know what you thought of the career fair. And best of luck today, and happy networking. And again, thank you to our speakers, and thank you to all of you for being here.